very quickly, especially in these early periods. I know we're covering thousands of years at a time, these leaps and bounds. And now we're actually entering the Chalcolithic period, following the pottery Neolithic, which we talked about on Wednesday. And things are going to start slowing down considerably. We're going to be talking in terms of hundreds of years as opposed to thousands of years at a time, and looking now at the emergence of actually, well, the first cities. So that's what's coming. But before we go there, any questions about anything that we've covered so far? Anything in the readings? Anything that we've encountered? No? Okay, all right, so we'll keep going. As I said, we're going to pick up where we left off last time, which we left off with the pre-pottery Neolithic. I'm sorry, not the pre-pottery Neolithic. We left off with the pottery Neolithic. So that slide is incorrect. I should say the pottery Neolithic from around 7,000 to 4,000 BCE. And as we saw last time, we see the introduction of these new technologies such as double kilns, stone hoes for agriculture, clay sling bullets for defense, spindle whorls for craft production. We saw that wonderful polychrome pottery coming from cultures like the Hayloft period, where we have multiple colors and pottery is used and repaired and it becomes a luxury item. Movement past the dry farming line to the south. Now central Mesopotamia for the first time is being settled because we have irrigation and evidence of that. Not just that the settlements are there, but that they're starting to grow crops that actually need irrigation. They need tremendous amounts of water to grow. Things like flax. Evidence of bureaucracy. Our societies and our cities or towns at this time are getting bigger. Societies are becoming stratified. Personal property, of course, right, is part of that. And how do you measure personal property, right? You put your name on it, you seal it, you need to keep track of things. So we see that emergence. And also uniform temple architecture. We looked at temples last time at the end of the Ubaid period, right, which is right at the end of the pottery Neolithic. And we looked at two sites in depth, those being Tepe Gawra and Eridu, and saw the similarities between them. I didn't have this slide up last time, but I wanted to show you these temples side by side, these temples that emerge at the end of the Ubaid period. And again, look at the distance between them, right? This is a huge space of, huge distance between these two sites, and yet we see the same practices, the same uniform architecture being built at the same time. So this is Eridu level 7 and Tepe Gawra level 13. And again, anybody want to point out those attributes of the temple that we talked about last time? Why don't you guys shout them out as you see them? What makes a Mesopotamian temple at this time? There are a few attributes.
Offering table.
Sorry?
Offering table.
Offering table, excellent. All right, so that's one. What else? Yeah.
Tripartite layout.
Tripartite layout, absolutely. You can see that here with these two. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely, right. This niching, which we saw early on, right, which probably started as a system of buttressing for stability. Now we're seeing it actually serving a decorative purpose. And that's something that continues on and on. A few other things, right. We had, in addition to an offering table, also an altar. And most of these temples at this time the main entrance was what's called a bent access approach, meaning that in this case you could enter from the side, but the main access is you're entering in and then immediately turning to the right. So a bent access approach is something that we see at this period too. Another thing, the orientation of these temples, didn't mention this last time, is most commonly the corners are oriented to the points of the compass. So we would have, for example, this corner here, this one here pointing north, west, east, and south, respectively. So uniform temple architecture and also, right, comparisons and material culture like pottery, like we saw, this Ubaid pottery that is commonly found throughout this region at this time. So moving on from this initial period, we looked at this initial settling of Mesopotamia, these origins of urbanism, and we're going to be picking up now where the Ubaid leaves off. And following these developments that lead to an increase in urbanization and the emergence of really what are the first true cities, following in the tradition of Eridu, which we saw. And this happens mainly at the site of Uruk. We're going to be looking at Uruk in depth today. But before we do, we're talking about cities, so the transition from, say, like a village or a town to a city. What makes a city? How do we define a city? What are the attributes of a city, if you think of a city? Yeah?
Population of people who aren't just doing agriculture.
Okay, so absolutely. So high population, you hit two there, right? So the high population, and then you've got people who are doing full-time, say, craft specialization, or maybe they have administrative roles. Yeah?
A political, military, and/or religious elite.
Mm-hmm. Right, so class stratification, and then the people who are going to run the operation, right? We're going to be, building things, doing things, and so you'll have, military or political or religious elite running the show. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a necessity, but a form of currency.
Okay, absolutely. So currency, and then we talked about ways of trade and barter. Even if things are being bartered, you have to have a system of exchange taking place. And certainly we saw, even in these earlier periods, a lot of trade, right? These objects coming in, like obsidian, traveling 800 kilometers from Anatolia. So certainly trade, exchange, and a form of currency. Absolutely. We might also add to that list monumental architecture, public space, those sorts of things. And we saw those earlier, right? We saw the beginnings of that at places like Jericho with large public works, even in early periods. But really what's taking place and making these things cities is this shift towards everything being on a much larger scale. So much so that we're now moving away from societies that are based on kinship ties, and now we have almost like a form of proto-nationalism, right? Where you now have loyalties to the city. You have a geographic zone which is being occupied, and a much more complex social hierarchy in which people are invested. So a priesthood, a military, these sorts of things that shift away from the family unit and now more go towards a broader kind of social structure. So in a lot of ways we can see that cities emerge as the result of changes that are taking place in religious, political, and social traditions. In a lot of ways, they are the result of that, and in a lot of ways also they go ahead and inform that. There's a reflexive relationship between the city and the people that live within it. Right? It's a reflection of them, but it also changes them. So this is a big development, and it takes place during the early and middle Uruk period, from around 4300 to 3500 BCE. And unfortunately, it's a fairly poorly known period, this early period, archaeologically. What we do know in this region is that there's a continuation of traditions in the north and the south at the sites we saw before. For example, at Eridu and Tepe Gawra, we see the sites dramatically change in size. We see them moving from right before 10 hectares, 15 hectares. Now they're growing to almost 30 hectares in size. Two sites, Nippur and Tel El Haidar in the north as well, are 30 to 50 hectares in size. We have a massive city emerging, the city of Uruk in the south, which at this time grows to be 70 hectares in size. So just a massive, massive change. And what's really taking place is, it's not that more people are coming to the area or that the population is changing. We're seeing this process of centralization taking place, in which smaller settlements are coming together and forming larger cities and larger communities. People are coming together into these large cities. They're being attracted to the city centers, and there's a lot of speculation as to why this is. Uruk, for example, had its start as two separate communities that joined together, and we'll see the results of that in a little bit of time. By the late Uruk period, 3500 to 3100, the size of Uruk doubles almost in size. It grows to be over 100 hectares in size, twice as big as any other site in the region. And it's just absolutely massive. And with a site this large and such a huge population to feed, we see a number of changes. Well, first of all, technologically. This is the site of Uruk. which we'll be getting to. We'll come back to that. But we see the introduction of a few new technologies. One is the cedar plow. And what a cedar plow is, this is from a cylinder seal. You can see it's a plow in which it's being pulled by animals, and it's operated by two people. One guides the plow in driving, a groove, and the other drops seeds through a chute. So it's this sort of double action. As you're actually, going through and creating the grooves, you're dropping seeds at the same time. So almost like an automated process, and it allows you to plant seeds much more efficiently. Irrigation, of course, is present at Uruk as well, and they institute a system of long field farming. These very long, thin fields which use water much more efficiently. So you can grow water you could grow barley and wheat more efficiently and save water. The issue becomes one, however, of space and size. I'm just going to draw on the board over here. Let me see if I can get a eraser. So we see the emergence of these massive cities. Uruk being a prime example. So in the late Uruk period, we've got Uruk here, and a number of satellite settlements that would be approximately about a day's travel. The settlement period during this time, because of course most of your travel is being done by foot, isn't really going to be farther than 1 day's journey. But to feed a city like Uruk during the late Uruk period, you have to have control of the hinterland in a radius of about 6 kilometers. So let's say 6 kilometers right here. And 6 kilometers is a hell of a long way to walk, actually. If you're going to work in the morning, it's going to take you quite a long time to leave Uruk and walk all the way out to the field, do your work, and then come back. But it's doable. It's absolutely doable. Now, this transition that we say in Uruk, when Uruk almost doubles in size during the final part, during the Jemmet Nasser period, around 3100, now we have a much larger city and a much larger population to feed. That 6 kilometers of fields isn't going to cut it anymore. Now you actually need 16 kilometers. Which means that, right, just on the basis of the population and what we know, we can start making some very clear some clear conclusions about how society is organized during this time. With 16 kilometers, people from Uruk are not going to be able to get out and farm their own fields. Uruk becomes increasingly dependent on these satellite communities, and what that means is probably a system of either taxation or a system of tribute in which food is being brought from the periphery and into the city itself. So really, true cities again, they depend on satellite communities during this time. They are not entirely self-sufficient, and we can see an example right there. A few other developments. We see the introduction of the slow potter's wheel. We talked about pottery techniques a few lectures ago. This is a slow potter's wheel. What it is essentially a stone that you can turn with one hand while you shape the pot with the other, and it allows you to make pottery much quicker. So the origins of mass production. Now, pottery, like we saw during the Ubaid period, it's not quite as nice as that stuff that we saw during the Hayloft period, right? It's getting a little bit more desiccated, it's a little more mass-produced, and not quite as nice because more